Good morning. Welcome to Six Messaging Mistakes. There's a weekly live that I host, and I am super distracted by the crow outside my window right now. A weekly live that I host that's called Turn Your Messaging into Magic. So that's what we are doing here today. And I want to make sure that we are getting a chance to talk through why messaging is so important, because that's something that way too many businesses ignore or leave to the side, simply because they think we know what we're doing. We know what our customers want. And with good reason, right? This is how you got into business. This is how you've stayed into business. But when you fail to revisit what the market is actually willing to bear, what the market is actually telling you, how things have changed every 6 to 12 months, or at least once a year to every 2 years, you're leaving some opportunities on the table, because your messaging is absolutely critical, because your customers matter. It's how you connect with your clients. It's how you create a consistent customer experience. It's how you do all of these incredible things that allow you to succeed in your business. So that, in a nutshell, that's what brand messaging is. Brand messaging is how you communicate what you do, how you describe what you do, how you can make it concise and clean. And then there are periods of time where it's about, what is the fun stuff? What are some of the fun lines that we say? How do we make this stand out? But mostly it's about paying attention to your audience. So with that in mind, let's dive into what these 6 mistakes that you can make. And realistically, these are some of the most common ones that I see, not just in small companies, not just in startups, not just in entrepreneurs, but in bigger companies too, because we have this sense of, we know our audience, we know what they want, that it's very easy to not take a step back. So mistake number 1 is, first of all, not taking the time to do this, not taking the time to be clear about what your brand messaging is. In fact, when I work with website copy clients, which is one of the things that I do the most in my client base, one of the things that most people like to set aside is their brand messaging. But I won't take on a website copy client without doing the brand strategy piece, without doing the brand messaging piece, because so often there's a disconnect between either the people on the team, if there's multiple stakeholders, or between what you think you want, what you think you're saying, and what you're actually putting out into the world. Because perception is often very, very different from reality. So not taking the time to think through your brand messaging is critical. And it's interesting, very often, unless a client is hyper clear on their branding, the first round of brand messaging is like, whew, that's what we told you we do, but that is not the reality of what we thought we were saying. So the first round is always like, okay, here's what you've shared with me. Here's where that bridges with what your clients want. And then the second round is about refining to get it really close. Because if you have something to react to, if you're seeing it from another person's perspective, then you can start to see where the gaps are. And it's a really interesting process, and it's really exciting. But it also takes some deep work, particularly when this is your baby that we're talking about here. And it's true, whether you've been in business for 6 months, whether you've been in business for 10 years, 20 years, whatever this looks like, it's often very, very different from your perception of how you're coming across. And it takes seeing it through your copywriter's eyes or your brand messaging strategist's eyes. So as a result, it's absolutely vital to take that on before you do major marketing efforts, major marketing investments, like your website copy, like your collateral development, like your thought leadership development, to make sure that you're creating this consistent customer experience. Because the cost of not doing it is high. It creates not only internal confusion with your team, whether your team is one, whether it's just you, and obviously there's less internal confusion there, or if it's a team of 10, 20, 100 people, because that changes the dynamics of how you talk about things. And if marketing is talking about things one way, sales is talking about things slightly differently, There's already going to be a disconnect there. But what about your internal operations team? If they're talking about it differently, then it may feel to your customers like they were sold and promised one thing, and they're getting it just slightly differently. Sure, it's what you think. There just may be some disconnects there. So it's really critical when you're onboarding your team and growing your team to have some consistency there so everyone understands. And instead of creating this, 200-page Google document manual, or Word manual, or PDF manual, a lot of times it can be as simple as 4 to 5 slides, or a 1-page, 2-sided PDF. Then again, if your business is complex and has a variety of services, or is in a hyper unique industry that takes some education between you and the client, then it takes longer. Sometimes it does become a really large PowerPoint presentation just so you can get clear on it. And then we usually would create a summary. So it's like, okay, so here's the full details. Here's what you also actually truly 100% need to know. Okay, so not doing it can lead to poor customer experience, but also it can lead to confusion within the marketplace. If people don't know what you're doing, or if it's not clear what you're doing, then people are going to move on to someone who it is clear to. And another example I'll give you is that if you're talking about a problem from your perspective, the problem that you think you solve may be different from the problem your clients think you solve. So an example of this would be website copy, because this is near and dear to my heart, right? So if your website copy, if very few people incidentally come to me and they're like, I need website copy, or I need brand messaging. A lot of the time they're like, oh, I have this website and my designer told me that I need the words and I don't have them. Can you help? I'm like, cool. But they didn't know ahead of time that they needed copy for their website. They didn't know the role of it. So they're struggling. And that's why I've created some VIP day offers, because it's like, okay, let's get you in and out and moving forward quickly. Other people don't know they need brand messaging. So they're like, oh, I need copy for the website. Can you help me make it sound good? And it's like, yeah, but we need to do your brand messaging first if you've never done this exercise. The reason being that if you haven't done this, you may not be as clear on your brand as you think you are. And if you are, but haven't taken the time to codify it, it's very difficult to communicate that to whoever you're working with, whether it's an internal team member who has nothing to do with the writing per se, or very little with the original content development, or you're hiring someone from outside your organization. And so if you haven't taken the time to do brand messaging, I've heard several clients say, man, you're the first copywriter to get it right, because you took the time to do this and understand our business. And, we hadn't done this yet. You've asked some really good, hard questions that were thought-provoking and made us really think. And so it was a really good collaborative process as we got clearer and clearer and clearer on this. So that's mistake number 1, is not doing it. And what you can do instead is take some time to look through brand messaging worksheets. I actually have one that I give to people who are doing a VIP day for brand messaging with me, simply because if they fill it out ahead of time, or at least drop 5 bullet points or a couple bullet points for each question, as we go through it, then I know that they've thought through it, and then we can talk through those thoughts and pull on some threads to make it as effective as possible. But to go back to the what problem does it actually solve? It solves clarity. It solves unifying your entire organization behind what you're doing. So when I talk about brand messaging, I don't talk about, here's just the words that you use to talk about what you do, even though that's what it is. I also talk about the problems that it solves. So for your business, whatever it is, make sure you're thinking about what the problems you solve for other people manifest as, because very often it's not what you think you're doing. Okay. So mistake number 2 is not paying attention to your customers and not asking them questions. And sure, sometimes that manifests itself as surveys, right? We do a survey, we reach out to people, we get their feedback, and we use that data, which is called voice of customer data when it's free answer words. We use that data to generate some of the messaging tidbits or some of the descriptions that we use. That data is absolutely critical, but not enough people are getting it. And so it doesn't have to manifest as a survey. It could manifest as uh, like a review. You could be asking for reviews. You could be asking some open-ended questions like, hey, how'd this go? Can we do like a debrief on the project, get things from your perspective so we understand what it looked like. And then you can uncover some really valuable information. What did you think you were hiring for? What did you get? What surprised you? All of those things. And so I often help people develop like this post-project survey so we can talk through like the questions that are the most important to mine that very important information. And then we can go back through later and look at all of your reviews and recommendations and survey data and pull some really interesting tidbits. So mistake number 1 is not doing it. Mistake number 2 is not listening to your audience. Mistake number 3 is trying to be everything to everyone. And it's very difficult to do because even if your product or service is valuable for an extremely wide audience, the reality is it's very difficult to market to everyone. It's extremely difficult to market to everyone. So instead, if you can narrow down some buyer personas, narrow down who they are, where they hang out, what they do, it is much easier to have a conversation with a very specific person and tailor it to their needs than it is to back away. So while you don't have to niche deeply, some people do and have a lot of success there, you can also just choose a particular audience and focus your marketing on them. It doesn't mean that you won't work with other people. It simply means that you want to attract your target audience. And so there's a number of ways we can do that. We can create personas and name them like Sally CEO or John Jack of all trades, or whatever that looks like. We can name them and figure out exactly who they are, define them. Or we can just come up with some general perspectives, things that they're saying, pain points, other details, so that we can be writing our copy specifically to that person. And it makes it much easier because then it's a conversation as opposed to like just throwing spaghetti at a wall. So those are 3 mistakes. Something else to think about is focusing on being super clever over clear. There is no problem with being clever and picking a theme as long as it's super obvious to your audience what they are getting. Because, it's fun. That's how you can make your copy stand out. That's how it's like Mike Kim, if you know him or don't know him, he talks about find something you can build a campfire around. And so if that's kind of the central focal point, then it makes it much easier, again, to come up with some language that's fun, yet also very clear. When I did my friend Grace Fortune's website copy a couple weeks ago, it was we built something, we chose something that we could build a campfire around, and it was something that she talks about a lot. But by streamlining it, we were able to do it. However, we were also very careful to remain clear. One of the first pieces of website copy I did was for a business that focused their products and services around trains. And so it was really, really fun to build that. And then her photo shoot was all about trains, and it all came together really, really nicely. So it doesn't have to be thematic. Another project I recently did was around oceans and surfing, which was a topic completely, I don't want to say it was divorced from what they did because it's in some ways related, but it may take some alignment to tie it together, some careful idea alignment. But what we had to do was make sure that we were not being overly clever. And you can go all in and make it fun, but you can also make sure that it's just tied in a few words and phrases and woven throughout the copy. So another example I'll give you of being too clever over clear is when I first wrote my first website copy, business is copy snacks. So everything is like snack adjacent, we can say, like a lot of the things I talk about, or I weave in some of those phrases and punch just to keep the playful aspect of my brand alive. And then I was like, ooh, I've got the perfect CTA. It's get snacking. It's fun, right? And when I launched an offer that I called the snack bar, I was excited because I could finally use it. And it was like, yes, this is so close. as long as you qualify it with a sentence above or a question above that says, aha, I've got this. But when I first launched my website, I was so excited to use it. And then no one was clicking. And I was like, why are you not clicking? It's so much fun. But they didn't know what they were getting. So you have to be able to be clever and weave it through, but not sacrifice that for the clear. That means, not coming up with some super clever package names if it's not also hyper clear. Because if you need more than like 3 words, so if you've got your package name and you can explain it in 3 words below, 3 to 5 words, you're golden. If it takes sentences or multiple sentences, you lose something in that copy. So, those are 4 mistakes. Just because this is number 5. I think I'm on 5. I'm losing track here because I'm very excited and I'm jumping around. Just because you can help people get amazing results does not mean that you should promise that all the time, if those results are an outlier. So if across the board you have a 98% success rate, great, let's do that. But if you're looking at it like a select audience and it's like, yeah, I help, like it's those things. 9 out of 10 dentists recommend. Yeah, but which 10 dentists? Which 9 recommend this particular toothbrush? So be very careful. You can say some of the results I've helped clients get include, or some of the results are our customer base experiences with this include, and then offer some real typical standards across the board about the kinds of things people are saying, the kinds of experiences people have. Because if you're not sharing typical results, then you're setting yourself up and your clients up for disappointment. And that's the last thing that you want. So something else, that was number 4. Number 5, another just because you can doesn't mean you should, is there's a lot of best practices out there. There are a lot of experts that tell you you have to do things a specific way and it's their way. So it makes sense that they're explaining that, but it doesn't mean it has to be your way. So the best practices out there are best practices for a reason. They do work for most people, but it doesn't mean that you have to do them all. It does not mean, and I'm just trying to think of some examples. It doesn't mean that you have to get hyper detailed. It doesn't mean you have to get hyper specific. And this redounds to all of your marketing, not just messaging. But, just because as you're developing a brand or brand strategy, someone might say, oh, you've got to define your brand essence, or you've got to define your brand archetype. You've got to do these things. You don't have to. You don't have to pick one. Maybe you don't fit in one brand archetype. Maybe you fit 2. Maybe you fit 3. So let's define that. But the bottom line is, if it doesn't feel authentic to you, if it doesn't feel right, then you owe it to yourself to say, okay, so this is the reason that this is recommended, but I very strongly feel like this. So as long as you have a reason for not doing it, do what matters to you. And, there's an example of someone who's like, maybe I want to, and this is more marketing, but I want to build my email list. Okay, well, why do you want to build your email list? So I can get more clients. Great. How are we going to get more clients? Well, I don't have time to bring on more clients. It's like, so we can be doing this in the background, but we've got to be working to set up a pipeline. Well, I think I need to do speaking more so I can build that list, but I don't have time to do it. I don't want to do it. And it's like, well, if you don't want to do it, let's find an alternate way. There is no particular reason you have to do something just because everyone else is. So there are options out there. And so that's 5. And I think the last one speaks to consistency. Just because you can pivot often, just because you can offer a wide amount of services, just because you're excited by shiny objects, doesn't mean that you should go into all of them all the time, because you need to have an anchor point. You need to have something that's central. To give that example again, you need to have a campfire that you can build around, with Mike Kim's example, because if you are, and I'll give you the example of a copywriter. If you're a copywriter today, and then tomorrow you're a coach, okay, I can see how that's related. Then you decide to become, let's say, a travel agent. Are you still a copywriter? And it's possible to do both. I have a friend who's very successful at both. Um, but then maybe the next thing you are opening an e-commerce business. It's very, very hard to build trust with someone if they are constantly jumping around and you're not sure what they do. So if they have done all of those things in 6 months, it's hard to build that trust with your audience. It's hard to want to hire them if you're like, well, are they still going to be around? Do they know what they're doing? All of these things. So with that in mind, just because you can pivot often doesn't mean you should. You can pivot gently. And in fact, your business, everyone I know pivots their business at least once every 6 months. And sometimes it's major pivots, like, I don't know, when a schmandemic came along, everyone had to pivot to online. Cool. Okay. That's a strange thing that hopefully will never happen again. Um, but um, if you're making major career pivots every 2 to 6 months, it's very, very hard to generate. However, if you're like, "Ooh, I've got an offer that's really cool. So I have a website copy that's really cool. I have a messaging offer that's really cool." Then it's like, okay, so what do you do once you've done your messaging, your website copy? Well, then it's all about developing thought leadership and driving people into your funnel. So those are the three things that I tend to do, and it's all messaging adjacent, right? That's what this core piece is. And so it's a number of things. So if you're a coach who's offering different services, great, as long as you're fairly consistent in the messaging and what you're doing. So hopefully this is all very, very helpful to you. 6 messaging mistakes that many people make and what you can do instead. There's a post on my blog that is linked here. If you want to dive in, you can learn more about some of my thoughts on that. If you've listened to this and you're like, oh, I need to go back and do my brand messaging, please reach out. I have one-day offers that are really about brand strategy and getting some clarity. And then I have some longer-term offers as well that may involve a deeper dive into who you are and who you serve and all of the things. So I'd be more than happy to talk through that with you. And you can do it yourself, certainly. But as with all things in this in this live, it speaks to just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I'm actually headed into a client call shortly, and that's a major topic of a lot of our conversations with things that she does for her clients. She's like, just because you can do that doesn't mean you should. So I think that that is the baseline for a lot of what we're talking about here. And I very much look forward to chatting with you all again next week.